Other than the podcast itself, the best way to stay in touch with our various goings-on is to be on our mailing list. To sign up, go to spotlightonpodcast.com and click on Newsletter. Thanks. Hello and welcome to Spotlight On, the podcast featuring musicians, writers, innovators, and ideas shaping media, entertainment, and culture. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Today, the spotlight shines on the duo of songwriter, producer, and MC Küf Knotz and harpist, vocalist, and music therapist Christine Elise. Küf and Christine have turned the unlikely combo of harp and hip-hop into pure magic with their 2024 album, Hypnagogia. The album explores the space between being awake and dreaming with surreal landscapes and vivid imagery that pulls listeners in. They've shared stages with artists like Wyclef Jean, Rising Appalachia, and Digable Planets. They joined me in conversation earlier this year to talk about their very unique and special sound and mission. And now, Küf Knotz and Christine Elise. I got to ask about this Alaska thing. I was looking at your tour dates over the years, and it's like, wow, I think this might be the biggest band in Alaska. What's the story with that? What is this Alaska thing?
Oh, it's amazing. Our first trip there was in 2018, and we got to go over there on a grant during the darkest and coldest time of the year where there's not much going on, and they kind of need some extra love and light during the really cold and dark times.
Yeah. It's when alcoholism, drug use, suicide is at a high during that time.
Oh, so the grant is to try to bring in things for people to do, bring in art, bring in healing, bring in just anything to get people to connect.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really amazing. I don't know the right way to ask it, so let me ask it in a bumbling way, and I hope you'll understand what I mean, but what do you see in the audiences there that, like, is that reflected in the audience? Do you feel the need? Do you see the weather or the darkness?
Yeah, I feel like that first trip we did 100%. Everyone was really receptive and open and super appreciative. Mm-hmm. And that made for such a good show because we were giving them something, and in return, they were giving us this great energy to perform in front of because they were so receptive. And that, I think, is what solidified us going back year after year, like that initial connection. We haven't gone back in the winter since then, but it carried over because when we do go back, those same people are there. And then it's just like, word of mouth is the best promotion you can have. And so each time we go back, it's more and new people.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting to see the itinerary because it's not like a show or two. Like you're really spending some time there traveling around. Geographically, how far apart are all the areas? It's hard to tell. As someone in the lower 48, I've not been to Alaska. My perception is you don't really get anywhere quickly.
Exactly.
Or easily.
For sure.
Well, when we're going into Anchorage, and there's one highway that goes about 6.5 hours north, and then the same kind of about 6.5 hours or 6 hours south. So that is pretty manageable to get all the way up to Fairbanks and all the way down to Homer in one tour. Since we're going only for a week this time, we're going to just be going north. So we're going 6 hours north. And when we go a little bit longer, like a month trip, then we started taking the small planes to other places off that highway, which are even more remote. And it's just like heightened our adrenaline of meeting people and conversations to the next level.
It's really incredible, though. I mean, it's such an interesting way to build community around the music and to build connection with people who, I could just imagine it's such a unique vibe versus just rolling into a town and playing whatever the normal venue would be. Although I'm curious, what is your typical venue experience? Are you playing clubs or are you playing alternative venues? Where does one see you?
Yeah, it's funny. I think when we first started playing, from 2018 to 2020, we were focused on doing venues, like the normal venue The 2 years where we couldn't do anything, we recalibrated how we would approach the road. And we, of course, venues are great because that's built for music and the audience and everything. But we found, for us at least, doing shows and events outside of typical music venues is what we enjoy pretty much the most. Not to say that we won't play venues, because we did a tour with this artist from France that came to the US, Wax Taylor. He took us on like a 20-city tour, and all of those were like major venues. And that experience was amazing too. But it still felt a disconnect. High stages, far away from the audience. So like being right up in an intimate space just feels really good. And so any chance we get to throw a show somewhere outside of a venue, or partner up with a community art center or organizations that have space available where we can create our own show and do that with them, is usually what feels the best for us.
Yeah. What's really interesting about what you do is that it doesn't take a ton of production. It would seem like it's, you're pretty self-contained. Like you could do a show in a museum or whatever. Like you could roll in and sort of control how you present yourself.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know I jumped right in. I wanted to go back a little bit to maybe even the pre-beginning, not just the beginning, but obviously so much of the coverage and other things I've read about you is like, oh my God, she plays harp and he's a rapper. Oh my, how did this happen? And while it certainly is unique, and I don't want to take anything away from the unique and beautiful sound you're making, something that sort of landed for me is like, well, of course, like, because this is what hip hop does. Hip hop it's nothing if not innovative and incorporating everything around it constantly, whether that's the news or the world or other sound. Like, it's just like, this was just a matter of time before the harp got sucked into the cyclone.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to direct this question to you, Elise. Like, what was your musical palette before you and Küf connected, and how wide-ranging were your interests?
I was more into artists like Sufjan Stevens, Coco Rosie, some Motown, the Ohio Players. And at the time of my life before meeting Küf and this project, I was a full-time music therapist. So all my music inquiry and searching was stuff that I could use in sessions, which was a lot of that Motown and emotional evoking music. To be honest, hip hop, I really just knew the songs that maybe everybody knew. That one Tribe Called Quest song that everybody can sing, or I didn't really dive into the culture before this. But since I was really open to improvising and figuring out how to navigate fitting in different places and different genres in music therapy, my music therapy studies, that allowed me to jump in and listen and figure out where the harp can fit in. And then as I was listening to more hip hop music, I just heard it sampled all the time.
Yeah. To be a harp player, to me, that brings up a lot of like preconceived notions. And one of them is a lot of education and training. Could you talk a little bit about like the educational part of your musical background, and like, are you classically trained? Did you do that since you were a little kid? Was it miserable?
Yeah, one thing that a lot of people don't really realize is the harp is very similar to piano. Like if you open up an upright piano and see all the strings, that's pretty much that's the harp, is the inside of a piano. So a lot of harp teachers who practice classically really won't take on a lot of students if they don't have a proficient amount of skills in piano. So I started playing piano at 7, and that was my instrument where I really had that vigorous practicing, like you were saying, getting sick of it, like having time just being like, nah. And I always reserved the harp for improvisation and creativity, that I could get away from that like classical box, which allowed me to not think of the harp from a classical perspective, a more percussive, emotional perspective. So I was classically trained. I did take harp lessons all through high school and college. but I practiced 6 hours a day of piano in college and only as an expressive with friends, improvising, sometimes in sessions. So it kept my connection with it magical, which I have felt over the time is lost if you vigorously practice something over and over again, trying to like connect with it.
It's interesting to hear some of what you had to say there, because I talk to a lot of artists here who, generally speaking, come from a few different broad categories of background. And the artists who were classically trained growing up actually had a very difficult time later in life transitioning to being improvisational musicians. It's really fascinating to hear that you sought out that element to be able to do that. I wonder, was it just about a place to play and to like a release valve from the rigidity of classical, or like that's just interesting to me. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, a cellist, he had passed away, but his name is David Darling. He created this whole program called Music for People. And the program was really about teaching how to use music by listening and not so much through theory. And there was workshops around the States, and it was offered through my college. So when I was in that program, I really dove into improvisation. And at that point, I didn't want to use piano. So I wanted to use something that was fresh and that I wouldn't have a hard time switching. So I think if it wasn't for that program, I wouldn't have been so open-minded to, their concept is no wrong notes. Play what you hear what you play, and that helped me become a good listener within music and improvise.
Yeah, the color spectrum infinite, let it spin. Dripping paint drying over walls under the bridge. Some brightness for the darkness in the places we live. The can spray, hand waves, keep a watch out for real. Roof climbing, track running, something new in the works. It's creation, the essence, tonight is the birth. In the morning, catch the sights on the way to your job. It's exotically odd, a small piece of the pie. The joy inside the eyes, joint smoke in the sky. It's an air of delightment, what a wonderful high. Brick writers, train taggers, billboards of the murals. Graph give the city an intangible awe. Palm claps, plenty daps, you know the tag hands nice. Life's a gamble, yeah, careful how you handle them dice. The stakes is high, we raise it right. We excite, hold a vision precise, and leave our stamps in the calm of the night.
Is it safe to say then that your career path prior to connecting with Küf was more about, like, you were in the music therapy world, you weren't necessarily doing the hustle of trying to make your life as a performing artist or make your income as an artist?
Yeah, I was full-time music therapist. The first time I ever performed in a venue was when he called me about 3 hours before sound check, the biggest night in the States to play, which is the night before Thanksgiving, and said, "Hey, can you sit in on this show?" And I had to say yes, because I knew if I didn't say yes, then like someone else would just fill in the
some other harp player. Küf was like, "Oh, my regular harp player couldn't make it tonight, so I need."
So that was actually the first time that I played in like a music venue, was when he said, "Come play."
Wow. And so, Küf, your situation was a little different in that you were grinding it out. Like, you were looking to be and you were a performing artist, a recording artist, a touring artist. Like, that was your path.
Yeah, for sure. So before this project, I was always in bands, like full bands. And so I had been doing it for years before this. And it was that typical starving artist, like grinding to get gigs, trying to keep a band together with making the minimum amount of money and having to split the pot so many ways. So it was definitely a grind. But yeah, that's what I was doing since college.
Yeah. What kind of bands? Like, what was a typical lineup?
So drum, bass, keys, guitar. And then I always had like a vocalist as well.
So was it like in the mold of like the Roots? Is that?
Yeah. I mean, like living and growing up in Philly, that was a huge inspiration. And at that time, so we're talking like mid 2000s, like 2004 to 2011. It was like Philadelphia and the soul scene and the live hip hop was at a high. And I was definitely in that movement. And yeah, so the first band was more like a Limp Bizkit, like rock and hip hop. And then after that, it was pretty much all like neo soul, hip hop, jazz influenced bands.
I know a lot of those new metal and hip hop fusion bands are coming back, or they're getting like they're on the nostalgia circuit. But I'm going to go on record as saying the neo soul stuff has aged much better.
Yeah. I would agree with you 100%.
I'm not a hater. I'm just saying. It's interesting though, because along those lines, like the music the two of you make, it could be 94, it could be 2004, it could be 2024. And it's not like retro or throwback. It's just not dated, and it's not pinned to any specific like school of hip hop. I mean, I guess maybe, but it kind of floats through time.
Well, thank you. That's an aim.
Yeah. Well, how does one aim for, other than setting the intention of like, well, I want to make music that's time, like, does that then, how do you translate that? You know, how do you bring that? Is it, I have to be careful what equipment I use, or it's going to sound like an 808, or like, you know what I mean? Like how is wanting to be timeless is one thing, being able to achieve it's another.
I think a lot of times it comes together pretty organically. Mm-hmm. Like, I think we both pull from things that we really love growing up, but also as recent as last year, and just taking those influences and aiming to put our own spin on it. Mm-hmm. And so like the first two records we did, we had other people producing the songs, and then we would add our parts to it. And if we heard some other stuff, like I might have a keyboardist come in and add this. This album is the first album that Christine and I created from scratch. Like every sound you hear on there, we created and did it. And this is the first album that has felt like our album. Mm-hmm. Getting out exactly what we're hearing in our head into a sound. Mm-hmm. And so this album in particular is a special album for that. It's the first one we produced on our own. And it's like, it feels like the most authentic and able to blend and create all the sounds we're hearing in our head. And so what comes out is that all those time periods, the early 90s hip hop, the alternative throughout the 2000s, the 80s, it's like a mix of all that.
Yeah. Given the sort of positivity, lack of a better way to say it, like the healing nature of the music that the two of you make together, I'm curious, Küf, what's your musical DNA? Conscious hip hop, outside of hip hop, like where do you come from musically?
Growing up, it was a lot of soul music and gospel. My grandmother really into gospel. She sang gospel, so I would hear that all the time.
Did you grow up in the church?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Every Sunday.
Was it a musical church? Was there gospel? Like, was it in you?
Yep, there was. It wasn't a lot, not that tight, but the choir was, yep.
That's great.
And then when I spent time with my father driving, I just always remember hearing soul music. And then my brother, I had an older brother, and he would listen to a lot of hip hop. At the time, I think it was like Curtis Blow, that era. So those were like three main influences.
Beautiful.
Then, once I was in middle school and high school, I veered into like an alternative scene, a little bit of the punk. I listened to a lot of Dead Milkmen in middle school, and also Red Hot Chili Peppers. So that was one influence. And then I think when I got into high school, I really got into Tupac. Tupac is one of my favorite, if not my favorite artist, one of my favorite. And then going beyond that, it was huge, like the Roots. Being in Philly, I was influenced by the Roots, Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, Digable Planets, the whole native tongue movement. And then on the West Coast, it was like the Far Side and that whole movement. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's pretty much.
Yeah. It's really, I don't know if it's an age thing or what, but it's really hard to escape that era of hip hop. It's just, it was so musical.
Oh, it is.
The lyrical content was so diverse and rich. Like, it's really hard to.
No, it really is. It really is.
I think I'm going to badly paraphrase you, Christine, so please feel free to correct me here. But my understanding is that you saw Küf play live, and that was sort of your first, oh, wow moment. I saw the line was something like it made you realize you wanted to, he had something or he had a skill or a talent that you were really drawn to that you wanted to be part of.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, what did you see? What did you see? I mean, other than, he's a handsome guy. We'll put that aside. Other than that.
Well, first of all, the lyrics were super just motivating and vibrant. And at that time, every single day, all my car rides were filled with trying to find songs that I could play in music therapy sessions. So my ear was just like listening to lyrics all the time.
Mm.
I had never heard somebody live. Like, I could use all those songs because just the place that I was working in, I needed to find music that was appropriate for the kids, but also that was liked by the adults.
Yeah.
That like cross any age, So I just was wowed by that. I heard this live right in front of my face, and I never heard anything like it before. And then on top of that, he had two keyboardists, one playing keys, bass, and one playing lead guitar. They were looking at each other playing.
Yeah.
Then there was a flute player sitting in. So it was like, as a harpist and an improviser and in that world, I was just like, the lyrics. And then he has just like all these different musicians sitting in that were solidly listening to each other. It just was like a dream to me. Also interesting that at that moment, I never said anything to him. Or that day, I literally just said to my best friend, wow, if I was ever in a band, I would want to be in something like that. And then I just let it go.
Yeah. We'll be back with more Spotlight On and Küf Knotz and Christine Elise right after this break. To go deeper into our episodes, please visit the show notes in your podcast app. Or to get a fuller unedited experience, go find this episode on spotlightonpodcast.com. There, the notes are packed with links to resources that give you more about the people and topics explored here. And now, back to Spotlight On. I want to come back to what happened next, but I have a couple other questions along the lines of the live performance. And we'll link to some of the videos that are online from the show notes. But one of the things that struck me was that I've never really seen anybody dance with a harp. And I really got that feeling while you were playing, even though you're seated, there's an element of dance going on,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I watch videos back and I'm like,
oh, I don't say that to make you self-conscious. No. There's a joy. You both show a lot of joy in what you're doing. You're smiling while you're singing.
oh, yeah.
That's a part of the show that I love. Because, honestly, we play a good amount of places where it's a sit-down audience, theaters and stuff. So
yeah,
I don't always necessarily get that energy from the crowd. So if I'm in a place where I'm like, man, I need some energy, like we can bounce off each other. I see her enjoying herself and moving, and it helps us out.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Could you talk to me a little bit about sort of the evolution of your live show? Like, how did you arrive at it? Was it birthed fully formed? Was there experimentation? Like, could you just talk a little bit about that?
So yeah, it's grown a lot over the years. I guess because those first few years we were figuring it out, sound-wise, presence-wise. The first show we did was just acoustic, just harp and our vocals.
Wow.
Yeah. And that, we did 3 songs and that went over really well. And so we did that for maybe 1 or 2 shows. And then we wanted to have movement and be able to perform in a place where it's not just acoustic. So we started adding our instrumentals. And for the first few years, it was Christine having the computer next to her and just hitting start when we started and then pausing it in between and stuff. And that went on for years. And then touring and doing more shows, it became, sometimes for sound people, it's not a typical setup, a harp and beats. A lot of times the sound people would see the live instrument and think that that's the main sound. So the harp would be loud and the beat would be like, bang, bang. You know, you couldn't feel the beat. And even though you tell them to change and work with it, it just got to a point where we're like, we have to take this into our own hands because you only get one chance to make a first impression. And if we felt like the show went over well, but we knew that's not what we wanted to present, I ended up getting like a small mixing board and bringing all the sounds in there and controlling our sounds on our own. And then just send out 2 plugs to the sound people so they have overall sound. They can make it louder or small, but I controlled how loud her harp is, how loud the beat is, how loud our vocals are, put a little reverb here, take a little bass out of my voice.
Yeah.
So we have complete control now. And that's been the most comfortable and easiest representation for us. And I feel like it's helped us put on an actual show, and create a vibe. And we have visuals with us now. Each show we have visuals behind us. So it's all incorporated in and presenting a live show rather than just being like going off of performing and stopping and going. It's more fluid now, more comfortable.
And consistent.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. That's interesting. That I appreciate you giving me that context because there was, I don't remember which one it was, but I was watching one of the videos online and I was really struck by the mix and how strong the beats were.
Right.
There was actually a moment where I was like, I can't, like, this doesn't make sense. It sounds too good almost for like a live thing. And it was really mixed well. And the beats were strong, but the harp was very like crisp and clear in its parts. So it's really interesting to see that the two of you felt the need to like just stop being at the mercy of somebody else's mix.
Yeah, for sure.
I think maybe this is for Christine, although if either of you have perspective on this, I don't want to glance over a word that you've used a few times because I want to make sure the audience knows what it means, and that is, or a phrase you've used. Could you talk about, as a practice, what is music therapy?
Yeah.
Good question.
It is a good question. For a short definition, music therapy is using music to meet non-musical goals. So it's really can be used in a lot of different spaces. Some of the spaces you might see is autistic support classrooms, emotional support classrooms, all the way to hospice, also in psych centers like alcohol and addiction rehabs. So really, music therapy is using music as a tool to work on some kind of life goal. So that is really broad, but it can then be crafted in many different spaces. And usually a music therapist will kind of have a niche in a spot, and then they really flourish in learning that population in that area and really dive into that one area. So you could see music therapy in many different ways.
Did you have a specialty?
Yes, I worked mainly with children and adults with autism. And I worked in different schools, different group homes, and a private practice called Music Works outside of Philadelphia, and a little bit in geriatrics as well. Well, that was my avenue, which is much different than what I'm doing now.
Maybe. I guess one other follow-up question in that regard, though, is what's the principle at work there? Is the idea that music is a way into people or a way out for people to connect and communicate when they don't have necessarily other tools at their disposal?
Yeah, like we notice the same kind of thing happens sometimes through performance, but there's a special magic that happens in a musical experience that I've found over the years. There's this trust, there's this build that happens without even saying anything, and therefore it becomes easier to share experiences. It seems to cut time in half. If we were having conversations about stories, it might take a long time to get to something that was deeper or something that's hard to share. But if we have this mutual music connection and there's something else that references it, just like if you have a lyric in a song and someone can say, well, I actually felt like this artist sharing this lyric and this is my story. exactly.
Oh, interesting.
That kind of happens faster when you have that third thing in the triangle because there's something else to reference. It's not just our conversation. And there's just a deeper trust that happens quicker. And also a reference point that also helps people explain things comparing to the music that they hear.
Yeah. One of the things that obviously stands out is the way you open shows with sort of the mantra and the sort of centering exercise.
Yep.
Küf, like since you're the one speaking the words, where did the impetus to do that come from? And like, what's the importance of that for you and for both of you? But, again, since you're speaking the words, I'm curious as to your initial perspective.
The original idea came from, so at a certain point, we were playing a lot of yoga classes.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes closing a yoga class, they'll have this thing, is it Savasana?
Yeah, like the yoga, the sleep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll be saying some things to take you out of the class. And that always felt like a really calm and like grounding space. And with us being on the road so much, like sometimes we just jump into shows and it's just moving. So as much as it's for the audience as well, it's a moment for us to just breathe
Mm-hmm.
before we jump into the set and just set a mood
Mm-hmm.
for everyone. And also it's great for dialing in on the sound before the actual show starts. So it's like a mix of a lot of things, but the main thing it is like grounding and a moment to just relax before jumping into the show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can just let it keep playing. I gotta think of something to put right here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, word patterns that follow the unscripted bounds. We lie outside of, nah, you can't divide us. Higher be the power, sun shower, sound louder. Turn up the volume, speakers scream the message. Drums hit heavy, the soul simply digested. Aura looks fluorescent, surely majestic. Many times tested, passed with flying colors. The whole spectrum, we splatter the earth's pavement. Paint riddled paths, yeah, we aim for greatness. Flavor upon flavor, this track is laced with. Far from basic, but still under the radar. Open up the mind, these times is feeling way raw. The signs, they clear as days off. So alignment with divine drive, it pays off. Directions, life lessons, the blessings, no question. Mastery itself, the steps from the essence.
What do you observe in the audience from the stage or from the perspective of the performer? Do you see that moment that you're taking manifest for the crowd in any specific way?
For sure. Even if I don't see it, there's always a handful of people after the show that specifically say, hey, I really appreciated that moment in the beginning. And that's pretty consistent. So even if I don't see it at times after the show, it's relayed to me that it was appreciated. So if we're like in a bar or somewhere that's like, pretty chaotic, I'm like, oh, do you think maybe we shouldn't do it? Let's just jump in and get it. And she's like, nah, like, it doesn't matter. Like, let's do it. And I'm like, all right. And it always ends up being a thing. But sometimes just like in a bar, it's kind of like people are talking and it's loud and all this. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, they're not trying to hear this. Like, they just want to, hear the boom, boom, bap. But it grounds us and it feels good.
It reminds me in a way of what Bob Marley and the Wailers used to do, but they would open the show with traditional Rasta drumming, with Nyabingi drumming. They're playing arenas. I would have to imagine that to a certain segment of the audience, it came and went. And whatever it was, I'm sure everybody had their own experience of it, but I would think the intention was about setting the sacred space, right? Like, now is the time where we're going to do this thing that's very profound.
Yep.
So you talked about how personal or how important this new record is because it's the first manifestation of the full vision, I guess would be how I heard what you said. What's next in terms of the rollout?
Yeah, so we just released the second single. April 9th, the album comes out. And really, we just plan to tour the remaining of the year, pushing the album, spreading the word. But also, like, you know, as artists, as soon as we finished that album like a year before we've had it done for a year.
Wow.
Yeah. So as creatives, like, we're like, what's the next thing? So we've already created a lot of new music. So once this album comes out, one of our intentions for this year is to release a lot of music. Pretty much monthly, we'll probably just be releasing new music.
That seems to be the thing everybody's counseled to do now, right? It's like
Yeah.
smaller projects more frequently, just kind of,
Yeah.
that's the way the platforms want artists to feed them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I'll always be an album dude. I love doing the process of it and putting it together, the presentation. But also, I know the times are changing. So we do have music that's ready and we can put out. So why not sit as well?
The art that accompanies the single is really beautiful. I mean, talk about creating the sense of like a universe around the music and the art. Like, that's really beautiful.
Yeah, it is. That's our friend EQ from Philadelphia, an amazing Philly artist. Most of his stuff is like, he does a lot of underground hip hop artists, like graffiti style. And he's just tapped into something special. So it's always cool to collaborate with him.
It's really interesting because it feels like what the music is. And I can't say it better than that, but like it really matches well.
No, definitely.
Really interesting. In the course of your touring, do you know where you'll be when? Like, will you be out here in the Pacific Northwest? I'm just outside of Seattle, and I would love to see the show.
Oh, really? We spent some time out there. We loved it out there. We were on Bainbridge Island for a little while.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, we did a residency there.
No kidding.
Yeah. On what's it? Lodell
Reserve.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? Tell me about that.
Yeah, that was extremely magical. We actually, for rotation for the single, we
Got the video
there.
Yeah.
But we got to stay there for 3 weeks, and the project, they host creatives, whether it's writers, painters, musicians, and their mission is to have the creative arts bring nature to people. So using creative arts to bring people closer to nature. So we got to roam the grounds even after hours and live on the grounds for 3 weeks.
Wow.
And just the amount of time, like there was like a magic there.
Yeah.
That like
For sure.
the grounds, you know, like all the plants and everything, as well as all the animals, knew that at 5 o'clock, everybody left. So there was just this weird, mysterious energy of like owls would come out. You know, at night you heard coyotes.
Yeah.
And in the music video, a bee just landed right on my hand. Like when I put my hand out, it was just like...
It definitely felt like we were like Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
It was like a magical, trippy experience.
Wow. What time of year was it?
When was that?
Was it August?
Oh,
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that time you'd be hard pressed to find a more beautiful place in North America that time of year.
For sure.
It really gets so special that time of year.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
It was.
It was. And then we after that, we did a week in Seattle.
Seattle, yeah.
And just played a few shows there. But yeah, we're aiming to come back out there this year, later in the year.
You remember where in Seattle you played? Do you know what venues?
The first time around, we played the Crocodile.
Yeah, the Crocodile.
Oh, nice.
That was with Wax Taylor.
Mhm.
And this time we played what's that? The yoga?
Fairmont.
Oh, the Abbey? Yeah, the Abbey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fremont Ad.
Beautiful.
And I forget the other place. It was like through a Sofar. Sofar sound show.
Yeah, it looks like you've done a lot of work with them. What's that about? I'm not too. I mean, I know what they are, but I've never seen an artist work with them so many times.
Yeah, a lot of times when we go to places we haven't played before, or we're somewhere we may have played before, but we have an off day, we usually aim to do a Sofar kind of as a pre-show and to like talk about our show. Because so for Sofar events, there's 3 artists on the bill and each artist has 20 minutes. So it's kind of like a sample of our show. So we'll go to these places, and the cool thing about Sofar is it's changing now, but usually like they don't announce anything. They have a mailing list that they mail out to, and they're like, hey, we have a show going on at this date. And it's kind of like a secret thing. You don't know who the artists are or anything.
So you get listeners who are just like into music?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, some. And sometimes it's like people who are going on first dates or like meeting up, or, it becomes a thing like that. So it's audiences that may necessarily not have been in the music circle to hear about shows or anything, but it's introducing them to new artists and introducing artists to new fans. So we aim to do those pretty often as like, a good way to spread the word about the show in that area and connect with people.
That's really interesting. We forget that not all people like live their lives as like, I'm going to go find the cool thing at the club, or like some people just like music as a thing to do, or if they come across it. Like, I can't relate to that, but I understand that. I've heard there's people who don't live their whole life around music.
Yeah, right. It's hard to imagine, but I think it's true. Like,
Thank you so much, Küf Knotz and Christine Elise. And as always, thank you for listening to Spotlight On. Spotlight On is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson. Editing and sound design is by Terry Grant. Our theme music, that's Q-Burn's Abstract Message. The most important member of our team is you. Thank you for supporting our work. Please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and then visit us online at spotlightonpodcast.com. There you'll find our free episode archive, our online store, and a link to make a donation to support our work. Thanks for listening. Be safe and stay in touch.